You have enough copies?
Okay, I'm calling the council workshop meeting in the afternoon of May 7th to order. The purpose of the workshop is to receive and ask questions of the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee. They sat through the budget hearing process, or not, the presentation process with the county council members, and they have before us, and copies were distributed to the audience and to the county staff on their recommendations. So I'm going to turn the floor over to the chairman of the committee, Mr. Buckowitz, to review with the council members. And Mr. Dunn has informed us that he's not feeling well and will not be here. I can't tell you why this other chair is vacant. In any event, Mr. Buckowitz, would you go ahead and start your presentation?
Yes, thank you, and we thank the council for the opportunity to be making our recommendations. As copies have been distributed, I believe, to everyone, I really am not going to read what's written. I'll just try and provide a brief.
Most of us can read.
I hope so. With the Board of Education, we've observed that in spite of pretty much level funding by the county in recent years, they've been able to add to their surplus, their fund balance. So in light of declining enrollment, we are recommending maintenance of effort funding for the coming fiscal year. This saves almost $4 million. In addition, we at this time feel it's not appropriate to spend money on constructing a field house in Perryville. This would also save about $2 million for the county as per their estimates. Number two, for the sick leave buyback, this is a program that appears to be fairly unique to government. We would recommend not funding it for this coming year, and also we recommend that the council consider changing the policy to eliminate this program. The estimated cost this year is $338,000 plus. With regard to vehicles, we observed the county disposes vehicles after 100,000 miles. Vehicles today, we believe, are better made and could have a longer service life. The amount realized from disposing vehicles, we were told, ranges about $3,500 to $4,500. This is not a lot of money. If the service life of the vehicles could be increased to 150,000 and we, have a longer life, this would reduce the purchase cost over time, and we think that would save the county a lot of money relative to the little bit that's lost by retiring them at 100,000 versus 150. That's not a lot of money. And we'd also recommend not replacing any vehicles this year that don't meet the $150,000 mile requirement. We recommend the addition, one new position, a fleet manager. We would like, right now it's our understanding that the fleet of vehicles is managed by the various agencies, and we think it might be better to have one fleet manager. The fleet manager could also perhaps better manage the fleet of vehicles to reduce the overall number, have more pooling, and maybe reduce the vehicle fleet considerably. We know the county has 380 pieces of equipment, or so it's been reported. And we also feel a fleet manager might better deal with the maintenance costs that the county experiences. A lot of money spent on vehicle maintenance, and a fleet manager we feel might be able to reduce these maintenance costs significantly. We feel the fleet manager should probably report to the Director of Administration. That's our understanding where it might be most effective. For Parks and Recreations, we did not find the argument that a turf field would, and I still have a typo in there. That should be F-I-E-L-P. Everybody pointed that out, and I still didn't correct it.
When you say turf, you mean synthetic turf?
Synthetic turf, yes. Synthetic turf.
Not natural.
Right. Synthetic turf field. We didn't find the argument that that was really cost-effective, compelling. and so we're recommending not funding it this time. We also understand that it's very difficult for Parks and Recreations to find part-time employees to do the maintenance during the spring, summer, and fall months. And we recommend that they consider outsourcing of those activities. The cost of outsourcing could be offset by reducing the equipment that they have. If all that's done by third parties, they wouldn't need to have the equipment that they have in operating and maintenance costs. It's our understanding that actually some of the managers for Parks and Recreation spend time cutting grass, which is not necessarily the best use of their time. For the Sheriff's Office, is requesting 5 new deputies plus cars, training, and benefit. We recommend not filling those positions at this time. Estimated budget saving would be $565,000 approximately, if we add it up correctly. Further, we recommend considering a change in policy. Right now, all the officers, deputies, and so forth take vehicles home. We recommend the consideration of a policy where that be eliminated, possibly offsetting the loss of benefit by a slight increase in pay. Doing so would use the vehicles more effectively instead of sitting and parking, in garages or driveways for 15 or 16 hours a day. We could reduce the fleet size. There'd have to be some overlap, but perhaps we could have more efficient utilization of the vehicles. These vehicles have a relatively short lifespan, and by having them shared, rather than having each officer have his or her own vehicle, we might be able to reduce costs further. And finally, we don't know if this is feasible or not, but it was suggested, and we thought it was worth suggesting to the council, that rather than retiring sheriff's vehicles when they're retired, if we're only getting, on average $4,000 for them, if they're still drivable, but they could be parked randomly and moved around periodically, this might provide a deterrent to people. If they see a vehicle in the distance, we all discussed how the state police used to do that on 95, and everybody slowed down. That if you're only getting a couple $1,000s for these retired vehicles, but they still could be moved from place to place, it might be better to use them as a deterrent. The bond financing, we discussed, again, the idea of perhaps not selling bonds immediately, but rather using bridge loans to fund projects and then selling bonds at a time most feasible. It's been estimated that there's been unnecessary interest costs imposed on the county by selling bonds too quickly. The Emergency Medical Services Program, they're requesting 4 new EMTs and vehicles. We feel the volunteer fire companies provide similar services at no additional expense to the county, so we believe that we don't need to fill these positions at this time. Perhaps the biggest and one that might stir the most discussion is Seneca Point. We know that the Maryland Department of the Environment argues that the upgrade for $11 million is all that's needed, and that they're willing to fund that through a grant. So entering into an upgrade that may cost $40 million at this time in anticipation of future growth seems to be an awfully big expenditure, particularly when the growth is uncertain. So we recommend that the upgrade funded by the state of Maryland be the one that's pursued at this time. And if additional growth occurs and facilities are needed in the future, then those costs will be borne by the people who are generating those costs at that time and not by the current customer. For Cecil College, we found the budget request for $158,000 to renovate one space was excessive, and feel that less costly renovation plans should be explored. We feel that these recommendations are not really reducing any existing services provided to the county and may even allow for some increase in services. If all these recommendations are adopted, we won't have to dip into the fund balance, and perhaps it will increase, or further tax adjustments could be made. There was a little bit of frustration that at times we requested information such as the rate schedule from the central garage and the health fund balance. And maybe people just forgot, but in any case, we never received that information. And finally, we realized that the change in government form created a special condition this year. But in the past, we have discussed the idea of having this committee really start work, say, in the fall. That wasn't feasible with the new form of government this year, but giving our committee or a future committee, if you have all new members, the opportunity to perhaps devote more time and more detail. A number of us are doing this as you are in addition to your regular jobs, and there's only so much time we can take away from our jobs to devote to this. So if we did it over a longer period of time, we'd have more opportunity to learn. In any case, I think we all enjoyed the opportunity to participate in this process, and we thank you for providing that opportunity. We hope that you find our recommendations useful, and we certainly now welcome any and all questions that you have.
Well, I want to thank you, all of you, for your participation and your recommendations, even though I may not agree with some or all. First off, I guess, does anybody on your committee have an opposing viewpoint on any of these issues, or was it pretty consensus driven?
I think overall it was consensus driven. We had discussions. We met a number of times. We met a number of times after the meeting here, and then we met one additional time that's last Tuesday. We met from like 1:30 to 6 p.m. Discussing a whole variety of these issues, and we agreed that, well, we might have minor differences about this, and largely we were going to present this as a consensus opinion and recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I do have some questions, but I'm going to defer to allow the other councilmen to ask questions first. Councilwoman Bowlesby, do you have any questions you'd like to ask at this time?
Yes, I do. On the Cecil College renovation, you stated that the budget request for approximately $158,000 is too much. As you recommend developing and funding a much less costly alternative renovation plan, did you have in mind a number for that renovation? Do you know how much you think it should cost?
Well, I actually, several committee members, did you go with Paul?
I did go, yes.
Yeah, I'll let Paul and Richard went to the college. I was away at that time. We were there. So you have some thoughts on that? Yeah.
The only thoughts I can offer are these. They have the enclosure, the exterior is completely built for this space. You're talking about an internal space which was used prior for computer equipment. It was air conditioned as such to protect that equipment. They want to convert this to office spaces. So you're talking basically petitions, some paint work. You have to come in with some HVAC for the offices. And looking at 1,500 square feet, and you're just doing the interior of this space, not the whole exterior roof, etc. 48,000, I believe, it sounded very excessive to me. I've done projects at home, like finishing off the basement, which is a space that's already there, and I know what I'm dealing with that. I didn't spend anywhere near them. So I just think that they could utilize some of the talent that they have in the college as far as engineering or drafting, and come up with a proposal that would be far less costly than what this is. That was my position anyway. And I believe Paul will concur with what I said. We did discuss it.
Any additional questions? Councilwoman Bowlesby? We can come back if you're not ready.
Okay. Maybe
Councilwoman Brumell, do you have any questions?
I fully support your participating in the budget process as early as possible. It doesn't even have to be fall, it could even be soon. And I know, because there's a lot of detailed information that you have to ponder over and scrutinize and research to see what are valid expenses. The fleet is one area where I've been very interested in doing some research. Of course, I don't have the time. The fleet, sheriff's department, the BIDAC, or the take-home vehicle, a number of things. I was wondering, I know it's not on here, but would you consider, maybe no, would you consider a auditor or a person on staff to help us do research on this is warranted.
I guess there's a number of ways you can investigate this. We're recommending adding a position of fleet manager to look over the whole fleet. That person will be responsible for managing the fleet, checking the mileage, trying to pool as effectively as possible so that we possibly could reduce the size of the fleet. If you want to study this further, maybe an auditor, I mean, you know, there are different ways I'm sure you can go about investigating this, talking to various employees of the county already, seeing what's effective, perhaps talking with officials from other counties to see how they manage these things. We didn't really have those opportunities at great length, but we thought the idea of a fleet manager would be one way to approach this and more effectively manage all the vehicles that the county has and the maintenance costs that they have, which we hope could be reduced by a person in that position. But there are other ways to research this. I mean, if you need to research this before you move on it, certainly that makes some sense. And I'm sure there are different ways the council would have to decide how they want to research this.
Well, the Crystal Moore from Harford County, the auditor, I would encourage you to speak with her to see the value in the auditor position, because they have a level of service or a level of ethics that they have to adhere to as an auditor. And the fleet manager is a great example. Love to see the value of having the fleet manager do that. You have to see what is the control. What are the expenses currently? You put the fleet manager on, then you see how has he made a difference, how has he saved dollars, and auditors do that. Also what was the other thing with, the same thing with the take-home vehicle. I know that one of the biggest arguments for keeping the take-home vehicle for the sheriff's office is that it's part of their pay. Well, in standing with other sheriff's deputies across the state, where do we fall? What amenities do we have? How valid is that argument? And I know that the sheriff did not, he stopped allowing the sheriff deputies to use their car. Hold on.
Can you ask a question, please?
He stopped allowing them to take home their cars outside of the county. Love to see the value in that. So my argument is for the auditor to see if that would actually save money.
Ms. Brunel, they didn't recommend an auditor. Maybe you can work on them next year. Their recommendations are their recommendations. So, do you have any questions about their recommendations?
Let's see.
Why are you looking at this?
Oh, the Logio, well, I don't even know about that. Parks and Rec, I agree with the turf field that at this time it shouldn't be a priority. And the sick leave buyback, you were unanimous on that? What went into your determination on that?
We feel that seems to be a policy that's fairly unique to government employees, that in the private sector you don't see things like that.
But did you have any discussion about the number of sick days that we offer? Was there any discussion about that or not?
Not a lot. We discussed it a little bit. We did talk about that. We didn't make any recommendation in that regard. And Dick, you want to say something?
We basically looked at sick leave days as just that, sick days, and took the expansion out as in the buyback provision and older for retirement, which we learned was part of state law, into consideration, but we only made the recommendation that we did because we thought that was the part that would be feasible and easier for you to accept. But sick leave, 15 was, we didn't challenge or even question the 15 days because that wasn't excessive.
Bill, if you want to say anything, just jump in.
I will, okay.
Don't mean to leave you out by any means.
Ms. Brunel, you finished with your questioning at this time?
At this time.
I'm sorry?
At this time.
Okay. Councilman McCarthy, do you have any questions?
The first question would pertain to the sick leave. Would these people just retain these days available if they were ill? So there would be no compensation, they just get to accumulate them and use them at a future point in time?
Under the current policy, yes, I believe that would be the case.
Right, it would have to be a policy change first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us are, in any way, shape, or form trying to take those days that have already been accumulated or earned or accrued away from any of these employees. But it would be starting from this point forward, once you've accumulated your 150 days, then it's a use it or lose it kind of thing going forward. But we realize that there's no short-term disability, no long-term disability that the county provides. So if you don't want to allow the accrual of those days, then the county would need to look into some kind of other benefit to provide the employees with that level of service. And in addition to being able to do sick leave days, they also still have the sick bank. So once they've exhausted all of their other days, they can then go back into the sick bank and get days out of there.
Okay, so they would lose no sick days, they just accumulate them.
Right.
They would accumulate them for maybe a long-term illness.
Exactly,
Right.
okay, I just wanted to make sure I was clear.
Yeah, we're not looking to take anything away from
Okay,
them.
when they retired, did you have an opinion on those accrued days?
We understood that retirement was state law, that they could use those days to add to their
Right.
seniority for retirement.
And that's okay with
So we
you?
left that alone. We
State
didn't
law.
challenge that.
Right.
Okay, the biggest question I have, and this goes to Seneca Point,
Can I interrupt your question just for a minute? Did you, the committee, sit through 2 hours of presentation by the county staff to discuss the pros and cons of the upgrade? How did you learn about the upgrade?
For Seneca Point?
Yes.
They talked about it here.
Go ahead.
Well, no, they discussed it here. Which meeting are you talking about? It wasn't one of
Did
these.
you sat through all the presentation
They were here.
for the upgrade?
given by Scott Flanagan.
We sat through whatever he presented here.
All right.
None of the presentations were there.
Bill was familiar with it.
Right,
We didn't know
no,
about any other.
no, Scott Flanagan made the presentation, and
Right. And we also saw, Richard provided us with a copy of the letter from Department of the Environment with their recommendation.
This was a PowerPoint presentation, and basically went on for close to 2 hours, does that sound correct?
was that in the morning or in the afternoon? In the morning, right.
We were.
So you saw the abbreviated version, not the 2-hour long form.
Did you have a copy of that letter?
I do.
You want the video?
Personally, I read everything I could get my hands on
Concerning the Seneca Point project. And, with what I read, it was how I formed my opinion, and I tried to share that information with our group.
Mr. McCarthy, I'm sorry for the interruption, but go ahead and ask your question.
It's okay, I mean, if you feel that you can basically best describe this. I mean, my concern here is, there's 2 basic ways we can do this, is to continue with the same technology that we have, and please correct me if I make a mistake, which basically will be limited with the next expansion, which will more than meet the state requirements as presently stated. However, once we get to a point where we grow any further than that, and who knows when that will be, we will not have the physical space or the technology in place to expand this at any particular time in the future, which means we'll have to scrap this facility, greatly reduce it, or create another one, which I don't think would be the way to go. I feel that what you're proposing here would essentially be painting us into a box, whereas we would not be able to expand in the future. Now, I don't know when this future is going to come, but I do feel very firm that we can build it now cheaper than we'll ever be able to build it in the future. And if things go the way that I hope they will, companies right now,
Mr. McCarthy, do you have a question?
the question is did you evaluate all of these different options?
I think that we did, because one of the things that we looked at is when is this future growth going to happen?
That's what we don't know.
Exactly. And if you look at what the projections were for the grass situation and everything else, that did not materialize. We don't know that the growth is even going to occur. The growth corridor where Seneca Point would be, our growth could be up in Rising Sun, it could be down in Cecil, below Chesapeake City. Just let me finish, please. And we also felt like, right now, the treatment plant is only at half capacity. So we don't know when the other half of that capacity would be used up. And if that's going to be 10 years or 15 years or 20 years from now, we have no idea. But is technology in the wastewater treatment going to change in the next 10, 15, 20 years? We think that it probably will. As we have experienced over years and years and years with technology, as technology is out there, it keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So we don't know what that is. We don't know when that will occur. And it's hard to ask the current citizens to foot the bill for $30 million worth of expansion that we don't know when we're going to need that, and if we're going to need that.
What do we do if we expand and don't have it? The capability to basically provide water and sewer, or provide sewer. That's the issue.
Spend $30
But
million.
at that point, we will miss the opportunities. At least that's according to what the economists say.
How did you come to the conclusion that spending this money now, it'll be paid for by current users? When the proposal indicated that to raise the connection fees dramatically
Right.
for new hookups.
Right.
Why wouldn't the new hookups be paying off a lot of this debt?
They would be, as long as those new connections come into being. None of us know that. If those new connections do not come into being and the system still needs to be paid for, someone needs to pay for that. That will either be the people on the system or the rest of the citizens of the county including the bill for that.
So you all are betting that the county isn't gonna grow that much?
In the setting of one area.
Oh, it would be the whole way up to 270, no?
May I say something? Sure. When you look at this and you see that you have a process that satisfies the Maryland Department of the Environment's requirements, and we always complain about whenever the state gives us a mandate, and here we have a mandate given to us, and they're saying that the denitrification system will meet their requirements, and they're even giving us grant money to do this. I question, why would we want to spend an additional $30 million when we don't know if and when we're going to need the additional capacity? Let's look at the growth study. How long ago was that growth study completed? Several years, when we were anticipating a growth in the western part of our county from BRAC. That never materialized. If you look at our growth in our county over the past 40 years, because they always say history is an indicator of your future, you'll see that the growth has come from the state of Delaware westward into Cecil County, being the northeastern part of Cecil County. There's a natural barrier being the Atlantic Ocean just east of Delaware. So if I were to project, or anybody were to use common sense and try to project where the growth is going to be, it's going to be in the northeastern part of our county. So how can you sit there and use an older study to predict that Seneca Point is where the growth is going to be? I had a little problem with that. So if you don't need the capacity now and will not need for, 15, 20 years, then why would you want to spend the money now, burden the system users and the taxpayers in the county with an additional $30 million that you don't have to spend? Further, if you use the main membrane reactor system for $40 million, that's being sold to us by one vendor, not a multitude of vendors, which would give us competition. When you have one vendor source, there is no competition, so you have no way of driving this price down. That's basically the reason I took the position that I did.
It's my understanding, though, that that bid was put out for competitive bids before it was accepted.
Maybe so, but I'm saying there's only one vendor with the membrane reactor system
No,
available.
there were multiple vendors with that same technology that was put out for
With the
bid.
seaweed.
All right.
With the seaweed, that's what it is the sole procurement on the seaweed, membrane bioreactor, I believe.
I'd like to say so. I don't think the,
Competitive process, it was a competitive.
Mr.
Okay.
Wine, would you use the mic?
So I'm correct, it was a
It
competitive
was a
process.
competitive
There was
procurement process.
3 MVR bids, 2 were found to be legitimate. GE with the Z-Weed system got it. General Electric with their Z-Weed
yeah.
system. Okay.
In any case, that wasn't the main consideration. I would like to say that I'm a little skeptical about the projected growth in any case. I tend to sympathize with the comptroller of the state of Maryland, who is arguing that the current things that have happened in the state are driving a lot of businesses out. I realize that doesn't include government entities such as at Aberdeen. But if you look what's going on with Aberdeen, there's a real push right now for them to skip over Cecil County and go right to Newcastle, extending the mark, building a station, and the University of Delaware is pushing very hard to establish an alliance with Aberdeen, and that may bring, that they may just skip right over Cecil County. So I'm a little skeptical of a lot of growth projections about Maryland, because we see this, one of the things I study is a little bit is how different states grow, and the states that have the highest taxes are not faring very well right now. And Maryland is a high tax state. There's no two ways about it. And I hope the comptroller runs for governor, but that's a whole other issue.
Does the council members have any more questions?
I did want to say, I found it the bond financing. I agree with that. We need to be more strategic in using our line of credit and not to borrow the money before we have the project. Very good.
All right, I'd like to,
Mr. President, I think Winston,
well, but
comment on that if
I
possible.
was gonna say that I was gonna open it up to the administration staff to ask questions. Now, I would prefer not to defend your position or defend your proposed budget, but to ask questions on what their position was and how they came to the choice that they made. So let's not get into a debate on what you want, what they want, but let's hear how you came about your recommendation. So, Al, anybody at that table? Craig? Let me move this chair.
Yeah, I think Winston would just like to comment on the bond financing for starters. Paragraph 7.
Yeah, we'll start there. Actually, you'll see in the FY14 budget, that's exactly what's being done. It's the easiest way to say that. 2009 to 2011 is a long time ago, and you'll notice we've deferred the bond offering of 2013 to 2014, and that's part of the reason. The discussion, not to go through every individual item, but the question on number 1 is, there's no recommendation of what's going to change. So all it's done is say the dollar amounts are there. I'm not sure what recommendations you have to result in a $3 million change. The Perryville Fieldhouse, by the way,
It was not proposed in executive's budget.
for 14.
It was requested, but not, it didn't make it to the final proposed budget.
Right. On the sick leave buyback, I want to clarify that corporations actually supply intermediate insurance for certain things that is not done typically in the governments. And the reason why the sick leave program is the way it is, in part, is history, I agree. But it is in part the fact that there's not a desire to buy insurance for the employees to cover a certain time frame. So the sick leave plan covers a couple of issues all at one time.
Is this like the Aflac insurance, the disability insurance issue? What you're
Yeah,
talking about?
you can get, we do not provide insurance beyond essentially day 1. And up at 6 months, you can start to do a disability type of arrangement. But that intermediate time frame is very much dependent upon the sick leave, which is the reason why corporations will insure themselves. Governments, there's a reluctance to put their programs in the hands of actuaries beyond what they have to. That's partly history. On the vehicles, the 100,000 is one part of it because of the diversity of vehicles in wear. Sheriff's vehicles are very intensely used. vehicles that drive around the landfill aren't. There's the 100,000 mile rule as a blanket for all vehicles wouldn't work, because the vehicles around the landfill, whether they're the giant vehicles with the big wheels or small, they get to a certain point where their maintenance costs exceed the value of the vehicle, and that's why it's disposed of at that time. But, like everything else, that can be looked at, but a firm rule for all vehicles would be counterproductive. On the fleet manager, we have to say that the council and the committee cannot add costs. On the potential that it pays for itself, potentiality and reality are two different things. One of the things that you noticed that was changed in the 2014 budget was to focus the vehicles into one fund. They were all individually purchased. And I guess our question there is, reducing the motor vehicle fleet by 40%. That includes 40% of the landfill vehicles, 40% of the sheriff's vehicles, 40% of the ambulances, as well as 40% of the dump trucks. Is that true?
Before you get to that, I think I can help there a little bit. The only vehicles that participate in a take-home policy outside of the sheriff's office are people that are on call, mainly a wastewater employee or a landfill employee. So to the extent that they're there, it amounts to it's a very small amount. By reading the amount later on in the sheriff's office, that also discusses the concept of a reduction of the fleet size by 40% by virtue of reducing the take-home policy. For clarification, I think it appears to omit the trade-off that were that there, you would be doubling the amount of the usage for a particular piece of vehicle by having it on the road for 16 hours. So while you may not, you may think you'll be able to reduce the size of the fleet, you're going to have to replace the existing ones twice as fast for using it for 16 hours. So you still won't completely eliminate the concept of the cost.
Was the Citizens Advisory Panel aware of the experiments in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and I think Kansas on using random vehicles that were retired and leaving them on roadsides? The practice was stopped. I think it was done in the 70s and 80s. And the reason why it was stopped is the spray painting on the vehicles got to be a very bad advertisement for public safety enforcement. However, if the intent was to put more vehicles out there, then paragraph 2 of item 6 and paragraph 3 are counterproductive, because the major reason most jurisdictions allow vehicles to be taken home by sheriff or any public safety enforcement offices is the fact that they are visible. And item 3 is trying to increase visibility. Item 2 seems to be cutting it back. And to be honest, I think if we were to schedule hours on what was going on for each one and subtract the need to do maintenance on vehicles spray painted, we'd probably end up with a better circumstance to take them home. The other things probably can be and should be addressed at various times. The major items is the fact that on item 1 is a very large concern, because what we're looking for is the ideas that will permit a cost reduction. Just saying.
When you say item 1, what are you talking about?
The Board of Education. Just saying that the maintenance of effort is X doesn't necessarily say how we're going to get there. The delivery of services is changing. Part of the argument that is made by the Board of Education is that there are not only mandates by the state and the Fed that need to be met over time, but there is also the circumstances that if we are to provide for jobs for the citizens who are going through our public schools at this point, then we need to educate them in the tools that they need. And the tools will include a lot of information and a lot of technology that the traditional school does not have. There is part of their budget that relates to securing the safety of the students and employees. But when we're speaking of reducing a budget by over $3 million, I think the issue becomes how, not just saying it should be cut. And we don't see that in the recommendation on one, and we're asking for where.
Is that your question?
Yes.
I'm still waiting for
One
Okay.
sentence, one word, where?
Okay, well, it was not our objective to micromanage the entity. What we did observe was that in the past years, there has been basically no increase. The nominal funding has been about flat from the county, and the board has managed to manage the school system very effectively and even add to their fund balance. Also, they're still getting increased funding from the state. So what we've observed without, getting in there and visiting every school is that they have been able to increase their fund balance with basically pretty much constant funding from the county.
On the fund balance issue, let's mention something that all governments face. The Board of Education has a relatively fixed income. There are grants and such which basically don't add to the fund balance. Because of the way a budget works in government, you can't spend more than that. The jurisdictions that have a public safety environment often find that their overtime is the major, along with tornadoes and hurricanes and things like that. But realistically, across all governments, public safety is the one that typically breaks a budget. The schools don't face that. What that means is, if they're budgeting 100%, unless they go on a spending spree at the end of May and during June, they're always going to have a little surplus for each year. Their intent is to try not to do that, and their intent at times has been to spend it with purpose in the succeeding year. But realistically, there are set up budgetarily, they will always add a small amount every year. That is part of what the budgetary controls are. They do not raise their own taxes, therefore they don't have the ability to determine whether there is losses based on bad debts. The loss of bad debts from the county and the state, I'm hoping is zero. So what I see there is the fact that there is a conundrum. They need to use the fund balance in an appropriate way, and they have at times in their public sessions discussed that. But to spend $3.7 million on taking it from fund balance, quote, is a lot of money all in 1 year, and we're not offering any recommendations on where. And I really think that is one of the issues that needs to be addressed.
Mr. Whiteheart, do you have any questions, or?
No, sir, thank you.
I'd just like to say one other thing.
Sure.
To Winston. With regard to the police vehicles, they're not necessarily contradictory, they're just a substitution. You can substitute vehicles that aren't used in active duty, and even use those as take-home vehicles as long as they're drivable, and still reduce the active fleet.
Areas that have tried that have found that the cost of transferring the vehicles, especially in a county versus an urban environment, means that you have to have the vehicles positioned and parked. You have to drive to the place to position and park. You have to exchange it. Part of the reason for vehicles being there is not only their visibility, but the fact that the individuals are on duty up till the last point, and they can be released from anywhere in the county where they're assigned. In an urban environment or in a smaller environment, it is not an issue where they are working and where they go. In a larger area, if you live in Rising Sun and your last working location is in Cecilton, then you are a visible resource for the entire drive back. On the other hand, if they were required to exchange vehicles, for instance, coming back into the sheriff's office here and exchanging a vehicle, you then essentially are paying for unusable time at the end of a workday, as well as paying for the vehicle. I think that in the environment that we have here and the geographic constraints, I think it's a bad trade right now.
Okay, well, that was our recommendation. The other thing I'd ask is, why does everybody on call have to have a county vehicle? Why can't they be paid mileage?
Because the IRS mileage rate is going up much faster every year than anything else. I think that there are individuals who don't have county vehicles who at times do show up because they have to.
I don't want to, I'm not supporting on-call take-home vehicles, but I do know that some of the jobs are very specific, and they need to have tools. And they have pickups and trucks, and they have what they need to respond in an emergency. If there is a sewer outage, or a sewer plug up, or a sewer problem, the wastewater people need to get to someplace. When they get there, they need to have the tools to manage the problem.
In fairness to all involved, Mr. Buckowitz and members of the committee, I mean, I don't know if we're not credible, but I'm talking about 3 vehicles over the course of any one point in time that would be considered the on-call out of 380 exclusive of the law enforcement community.
I don't think you addressed that at all.
You're talking about a wastewater guy, you're talking about a roads guy.
No, that's not part of our recommendation either. No.
It's the concept of the on-call.
Yeah. Well, we just feel that we could reduce the overall number of vehicles with better management.
All right, do any of the council members have any additional questions?
This, item under 5, due to the difficulty of hiring temporary employees, recommending that lawn maintenance activities for county parks be outsourced to private contractors. Do we have any estimates? I guess I'm concerned with, you being able to get the numbers to us so that we can make an informed decision, to show this is what you're currently paying, this is what you could be paying.
No, we discussed, we are aware of that. Oftentimes it's people in the administration of parks who are doing the lawn maintenance. And that really doesn't.
Getting paid close to 100,000, I was concerned about that.
Yeah.
All right, I'd like to give the opportunity to the press and to the audience to ask questions, if you don't mind, up till 2:30. We're going to wrap it up at 2:30, so we have 10 minutes. Anybody in the press, anyone in the press or the audience have any questions of the citizens budget? Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. I just want to make sure that, as an employee, sick leave buyback, that you're aware that public safety pension people do not add that to the end of their retirement. Second, Parks and Rec, and that's what Ms. Brumell was saying, we did outsource that previously, and we found it not to be cost effective. And then 2 things as a citizen. I think that we need more than 5 new deputies. I think we have a lot of problems within this county. And as someone who's had emergency medical response, I think we definitely need more EMS response, because I've waited over an hour and a half for an ambulance in the past 2 months.
Was that an ambulance or a paramedic?
Paramedic and ambulance.
Both.
Yes. They came from Delaware.
Where do you live?
Upton Heights. There was an accident and the one was broke down. Rising Sun was broke down northeast. We had to get someone from Delaware. That's all.
Is there anyone else in the audience or the press, Mr. Reese? Wait, let him get the...
Okay, I thought I was loud enough. Okay, as far as sheriff deputies taking their cars home, I don't really have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with, I believe the policy is that they can use it as their private vehicle and drive about. That's what was reported before. I don't know if that's a fact. I don't have them problem parking in front of their house, but if they throw the family in and go for groceries, that's a problem, I think. As far as EMTs, etc., Singerly Fire Department has now, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, 6 professionals for firefighting as first responders. We have fire stations that the county is already, ambulances, etc. Why don't we have professionals, and I know this is a cost increase rather than a decrease per se, have professionals there utilizing those vehicles, with a backup being the volunteers, because it does take time, obviously, for the volunteers to show up and then go out. So I would have 2 people on rotating shift at 3 strategic fire departments to use the equipment that's already provided and to go out and do what they have to do, and then the volunteers to be backing them up.
Okay, well, this is something we have to consider in the future. I think we do have a problem with ambulance response. I think that Mr. Brooks has brought it to our attention in the past that ambulance response is a problem that we need to address. And he actually gave a couple of proposals to the commissioners.
How much did it cost?
It was multi-millions for us, the county. Now, this is a subject for another day and another Citizens Budget Advisory Commission recommendation. But I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Reason, but we definitely need to do something, but not this time, not this budget. Is there anyone else in the audience?
We do have a clarification on the sheriff's.
Sure, just, Mr. Reason, a clarification. During the tenure of the county commissioners, Sheriff Janney, at the request of the board, came forward to discuss the concept of the personal use of take-home vehicles. And as you may recall, Sheriff Janney agreed to essentially eliminate the personal usage of the vehicles. You may recall also that they, to the extent that they have a requirement to utilize them, they have to fill out documentation for the mileage. They maintain those records at the sheriff's office. They are available for review. That program is still ongoing, and that was all done prior to the change into charter government.
Mr. Wyper, would you please request for the council's benefit the take-home cart policy from the sheriff again?
We certainly will.
Thank you.
I would like to see also that there must be a reduction in mileage. I'd like to see the reduction since that policy went into effect. I thought it was for those county vehicles that were going outside of the county that they changed the policy. But I would like to see, what the current policy is. I just wanted to point out that, throwing money at a department isn't necessarily going to make it any better. We need to get something in writing of how they're going to use that money, whether it's in the sheriff's department, whether it's in the EMS. We need to have firm knowledge of where that funding is going and expect results.
Excuse me, where are you?
I'm just, is it okay for me to?
No, what?
I was responding.
What recommendation?
I was responding to the recommendation of having all the deputies funded and having more funding for the EMS.
You want to know where the deputies are going to go?
I'm saying that we need to have a firm policy of how those deputies are going to be utilized. What is it that we're going to get for that funding?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Shouldn't we ask the sheriff?
Yeah, I would ask the sheriff. Is it okay for me to make a statement now?
Sure.
All right.
Why don't you want the manager to send a letter to the sheriff and ask him to explain his utilization of his 5 new deputies?
That would be a great idea. Put it on your letterhead.
I'm sure that he brought it to our attention and discussed it at our presentation, but maybe we can get a little bit more detail.
Okay, this goes, Mr. Zhang had brought it up that he needed to have the crimes unit, street unit, officer, back in Cecilton. And, of the 5 officers, Sheriff Janney had said that they would be just basically on the street, deputies. Not specifically for the street unit.
Any other, Mr. McCarthy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a single question, and I don't even know if it's in your domain here. Do you have any opinions on the Cecil County landfill and whether or not it should be self-sustaining, or should that be paid for through general funds?
We didn't, we accepted the current arrangement of having an enterprise fund. So we didn't consider that because that certainly wasn't something that was proposed. We just looked at the current budget and discussed that, but we didn't discuss any further about a major change like that. That would be quite a substantial change.
Did you have an opinion at all?
I don't want to speak for everybody on the committee. I think we'd have to sit around and discuss it and look at what a proposal might look like. If you're going to do that, how would it be funded? Who would be paying these costs? And, you know, personally, as an economist, the user should pay the cost, and that seems to be what the current situation is. But that's my opinion, not the opinion.
Thank you very much.
Last call for the public or the press to ask a question. Last call from administration. Last call from council members. Again, I want to thank you all. Do you have any last?
One last question. Concerning Seneca Point wastewater treatment facility, do you think that bond funding would be appropriate for that if it were to be done?
And we didn't discuss it, but would there be revenue bonds? Would that happen? How exactly, what type of bond funding are you suggesting? General fund or?
It would be just, I guess, a utility development bond fund, if such a thing exists, or a public works bond fund.
But I mean, would it be like a revenue bond that would be tied to the fees paid by the users, or would it be a general obligation bond?
General obligation bond by the county.
So then you're shifting the cost to everybody in the county.
That's correct.
Well, I think we'd all have to discuss that. I imagine people who aren't being serviced by that would have problems with it, because when your septic system goes bad, you're not having a general obligation bond to bail you out when you have to put in a new septic
Let me
system.
clarify something if I can. All the bonds that we have are general obligation bonds. Even bonds that are backing the sewer system or the landfill system are backed by the fact that if the ratepayers are not able to pay for the debt service on the bonds, that the backup is always the county itself. In the standpoint of the way we issue bonds is we allocate the cost back to the individual items. The reason why future users of a facility will actually pay for the facility's cost at that time is the fact that in the rate models that we use, it is on essentially an almost cash basis, meaning that when you allocate when you use bonds, the payment that is made 20 years from now by the user is helping to pay for the facility that's being used at that time, so that the current citizens do not pay for 20 years worth of use. They only pay for their pro rata share.
I'd like to also say that all the citizens benefit from wastewater systems, because if you have a septic tank, it will be, or it should be pumped out on a regular basis, and that effluent needs to go to our wastewater treatment plant. So there is some benefit. There's also a benefit from an economic development point of view. If we don't stay ahead of the curve and have capacity, it's not going to attract companies. We can't, the lead time to increase capacity is years. This capacity upgrade that we're looking at now is 4 or 5 years in the making, and we still haven't even moved the shovel of dirt yet. So if we want to grow, if our community wants to grow and prosper, in my opinion, you have to have some capacity. And you're right, somebody has to pay for it. Now, in my opinion, they should get paid back too. It's not just a one-way street. Sometimes you have to front fund stuff. You have to front fund it to get it done so that you can benefit. When we, the community, all of us, whether we're connected or we're not connected, will benefit at a later date. If we just ignore the fact and say, let somebody else pay for it, it'll never, ever get done.
Except for those people who live in town limits who are already paying for a system once. Now, by doing that, you would be asking them to pay for a second system that they are going to realize zero benefit from, because they're paying for the one in the towns.
I have to tell you that economic opportunity benefits every citizen in every corner of the state, regardless of whether you live in town or not. We're all in the same boat from an economic development point of view.
Absolutely, and the tier maps in Senate Bill 236 from last year are going to limit where our growth may come anyway. So You know, if the state has their way, all the growth is gonna be in the towns
Yeah.
and municipalities, it's not gonna be sprawled out across the county.
On
So
the
that
Maryland,
becomes an issue.
exactly, and the Maryland Planning and Zoning website shows the census anticipating the big four counties are where the growth is gonna go. And I wanna also, oh gosh, I always lose a thought.
All right, my chauffeur is showing up, so I'm gonna have to end this, but I have one more last question from Cheryl Maddox.
This is on the Seneca Point issue. It says in the citizen advisory, recommendations, excuse me, that you're saying that growth may or may not occur, and that's a basis for your decision. However, it's my understanding that Seneca Point is located in what the county has determined to be its growth corridor. And we all do know that there's not much growth going on there at this moment. But we have large tracts of land in Smithfield, for example, that is all ready to go to lure, businesses and industries. What if, and I know our economic development director that's her mission, is to find jobs and new businesses. So what if, in the next year or year and a half, she lands a great big company who wants to come here and they need a lot of water and sewer? Don't they use this facility? Am I wrong? Is it not Seneca Point? What if we don't have capacity, or all of a sudden it uses all the capacity? Then what are we gonna do? Did the committee just talk about this at all? It just seems a little weird to me that you would not have, because that is the growth corridor, not residential growth. I'm talking about commercial and industrial growth.
Well, first of all, designating a growth corridor and having the growth occur there doesn't always happen. If you look at Delaware next door, they had a growth corridor between 95 and 40 for decades before the growth occurred. The growth occurred in Hockessin because that's where people wanted to live. And only after Hockessin got so crowded and so expensive did people actually start moving down into that corridor. Now it's growing rapidly. It's also under our understanding that Seneca Point's only half utilized, so it'd be great if we got somebody in here that would take it all up, but I just don't see that realistically happening in 1 year. And what have we got, 10 new facilities that we'd have to build a sewer? Well, then we could charge them for it too. But hypothetical arguments, right now we see a facility that is underutilized, and we see the growth as, the idea that there's going to be that much growth as speculative at best.
I remember my thought, it was that, why wouldn't we want to attract growth by putting the infrastructure in? Because we have to be competitive. Doubling the hookup fees is not gonna make us competitive. So.
Okay, all right. I want to thank all the members of the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee. I appreciate all the time and effort that you put into this effort. I know that you have made a list of things that the County Council will deliberate over. Every one of them will be given serious consideration. I'm not sure that every one of them will be adopted, but I think they're all worthy of serious discussion, and I guarantee that we'll have some serious discussion. But I want to thank you for your service, and the council will decide at a future date whether we want to continue the business of continuing to make recommendations, and you've heard some other ideas for future discussion purposes and recommendations. So thank you very much, and I guess we'll relieve you of your duties until further notice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.